Welcome back. When last we left off, I was engaged in an extremely one-sided battle against the encroachment of the dreaded deciduous scourge, colloquially known as the Forest. While ultimately a doomed proposition right from the start, this does, however, have positive effects via stimulating the wartime economy, which in this case is wholly funded by the corpses of my defeated enemies. That is a fancy way of saying I chopped down a whole lot of trees and now have many pieces of firewood that I can then throw in a hole and eventually light on fire. Unfortunately for me, that is not enough, so I once more have to go and make an energetic withdrawal from Mother Nature's trust fund of Ligonus linguini, or several withdrawals. Actually, one might even go so far as to say quite a few. This is rather slow and uninteresting, so naturally my brain wanders off and starts suggesting I do stupid things to liven up my adventures, and conveniently a source of entertainment presents itself in the form of yet another local bear that has decided it wants to get a taste of my supple goose flesh. Now, I have been waiting for this moment for all my life, all 2 hours of it, because I have an experiment that I want to do. Remember the whole water slows things down thing? Yeah, well, it does, but for some reason I can sprint and bunny hop my way through it pretty quickly regardless. Bears, I am assuming, are too stupid to do this, so I want to see if I can lure one into a pond and spear it to death. My first attempt at this goes poorly, not because of any failure of execution on my part, but because I forgot to bring any spears and instead brought a knife for some reason. Flailing at the bear with it does nothing, naturally, and constant bear attacks tend to make crafting on the fly a bit tricky, so I have to break the engagement off and then go grab some. After returning with the pinnacle of pointy stick technology, then begins Operation Poke and Bounce, with limited success. I do get a couple spears into the thing, but bears are shockingly quick in the water when suitably motivated by shafts of wood being firmly inserted in delicate locations, so it gets its teeth into me soon after. No loss, really. It's good to know that this attack only works on wolves for now. To console myself after my humiliating defeat at the hands of an animated ball of anger yarn, I turn to my old friend Pot. Or rather, pots. Specifically, the pots containing possessions of dead people, which no longer need them. Ruins, like the one I'm stationed by, have random loot pots inside their structures sometimes, and while some of the stuff like quartz blobs is probably not that important, they do occasionally drop seeds and other useful stuff, so they are well worth checking out. This very quickly leads to a round of probably grave robbing, as I am helpfully informed that some of the soil contains so many bones. How many bones, you ask? I have no idea, but my inventory is full and you had better believe I want to find out, so hold please. Sorry, hold for a little bit longer. Miss Piggy and I need to have an intimate introduction featuring the sharp end of several sticks. It's nothing personal, Piggy, I just really like bacon. And also, you are technically an herbivore, so I can cook you in a pot instead of just going ham over a campfire. Anyway, after I get my ducks in a row and pour signs in my pocket, I return to the ruins with a shovel looking to do some sweet defilement of ancient burial grounds. I'm disappointed to announce that underneath this pile of bones is more bones, and not even the pick-upable kind that I may or may not be able to turn into bone meal at an indeterminate time in the future. They are all the lousy, low-quality human bones that have no nutrients or something, and crumble to dust when I break them. Not to be deterred, I decided to poke around a bit in other nearby ruins to see if any of them had anything more interesting than skeletons in their basements, and was met with almost immediate success, by certain definitions. I'm not entirely sure what a ruined bardiche is good for, other than being an interesting dinner table discussion killer that you can pull out when your grandparents want to start yawning on about the political merits of voting for a sentient carrot, but the sticks and flint in a nearby crate might be nice, I guess. Beeswax can be used to seal crocs, at least, and as I have been oh so helpfully informed by many people, crocs do store food like I originally thought. I was just using the wrong combination of keyboard ninjutsu needed to insert soup into one. The smell of the turnip and bacon soup I make to prove that I do know how to pour fluids into a container later on that night seems to have drawn in the eldritch monsters, and I'm treated to what in retrospect is actually my second encounter with random nightmare creatures this series. Hindsight being 2020, I think I actually was shot at by an archer of some sort earlier on, but at the time I was jumping down a mountain, and I attributed the near-fatal amount of damage to my general lack of limb coordination. Regardless, some thing that I originally thought was a monkey decided to start sniffing around, and, not to be deterred, I do the normal and sensible thing that you should do when encountering strange creatures in the wild and rammed my spear up into its delicate bits a few times to say hello. I have actually no idea whether or not this had any effect whatsoever, as another archer thing that I have still never laid eyes on then proceeded to administer amateur acupuncture at range from the cover of darkness, forcing me to hide in my dirt hole and frantically slurp soup to stay alive and, more importantly, quell the dizzies that you get from being forced to look at whatever that monkey thing was, and also dying, almost. Lacking anything else to do during the night, I turned towards doing some pottery to pass the time. Great idea in principle, not so great idea in practice. I'm gonna go out on a limb and assume most of y'all folks have never tried to sculpt clay while intoxicated, so let me tell you, don't. Just don't. I got myself motion sick trying to do this, and the resulting pottery, well, I mean, it was entirely identical to the other stuff I made because that's how the game works, but just imagine that it came out a little disturbed for the sake of the bit, alright? It shouldn't be that hard. Everything else I do is a tad bit disturbed already. Once morning breaks, I evacuate my pottery prison to go and get revenge against the home invasion squad with mixed results. The little monkey thing proves to be no threat whatsoever, as it is very quickly introduced to the business end of sharp and sticky. Sadly, I cannot, in fact, butcher it for its meat, however, which is disappointing. No chthonic demon steaks for me, I guess. The arrow shooter proves to be somewhat more of an issue, however, and if nothing else, I now know that bob and weave is not an effective strategy when dealing with them. Ouchies. Right then, with those distractions out of the way, it's back to work for me. I take a few minutes to lob my new fancy dirt containers into the dirt container cooking hole and get them smelting away, and then I can turn my attention to the charcoal pit in Potentia. My unceasing axe rampages have yielded fruit, or rather, wood, and I finally have the entire thing full of combustibles, which means it's time to move on to the next stage of the build, which is covering it in dirt and setting it on fire. Kind of funny how often tech seems to revolve around those two things in some combination or another, isn't it? Charcoal pits work in real life by enclosing carbon-rich material, which is usually wood, in an oxygen-poor environment, and then subjecting them to high heat over a long period of time. This heat drives off the moisture and a lot of the inorganic compounds that are usually present in some quantities, and if done correctly, leaves behind extremely dry, high-quality chunks of pure carbon material that burn hotter and cleaner than the original feedstock. In Vintage Story, that basically just translates to cover the pile of combustibles in wet dirt, light a campfire on the top, bury it, and then make sure it starts smoking at some point to prove that you built it correctly, which, honestly, yeah, that's pretty realistic. The constant downpour isn't going to do it any favors, but we are 7 hours into the world now, so I think everything's about as wet as it's going to get anyway. While we're waiting on all of that to burn up, let's go and grab some more munchies, since, once again, my adventures with the Nighttime Nutters has left me sadly bereft of snacks. This goes very, very well, and is perhaps my most successful foraging trip to date. To start, I find more turnips, which isn't the best thing ever, but more seeds, more gooder. I then find a whole bunch of berries, and immediately after, a family of raccoons, which aren't great food-wise, but I like killing things, so I take a couple of them out just because. Time is definitely passing, by the way. One of the ones that I speared was a baby, which yields no food, sadly, but it does tell me that it's probably time to start thinking about winter preparations if animals are having babies. After a bit more of nothing, I then decide to head into the forest and almost immediately trip over a family of chickens, which, for once, aren't electrocuted. Chickens go down in one spear throw, which makes them easy prey if you can hit them, but what makes them even easier is that chickens in this game are utterly homicidal to a level that even I, as a proud member of the avian family, am confused by. They aren't really all that dangerous, though, so mostly their aggressive tendencies just keep them in the area for easy stabbing. To top it all off, I discover a couple of very large patches of edible mushrooms growing on a tree stump, which will complete a meat soup back home very, very nicely. Combined with some grain and more vegetables I have, this will make a very happy bird for the next few days. Suitably fortified, I decide to step out and plant my turnip seeds, which seems to have been a mistake. Rift activity, which is a measure of how many and how dangerous the demonic incursions are, has been up the past few days, and the resulting populace is, less than happy to see me. The little monkeys, which are apparently called drifters, aren't the issue. They mostly just wander around, throw rocks, and eat up spear durability, and I took out 2 of them without any problem. It's the arrow shooters that are the problem. I can't see them, but they are definitely able to see me, and the resulting disparity in visibility between the two of us means I can't really fight them at night. There is also a third type of thing, which looks a bit like a four-legged tarantula that attended one too many math classes and leaned a bit too hard into the higher dimensional space as a lifestyle choice thing that I encountered very, very briefly. They're pretty mobile, but they aren't very tough, it would seem. Still, ranged fire brings me down to near death, again, forcing me to retreat for the night. Again. This is going to start being an issue. Seeing as I am clearly not going to get anything done tonight, again, I finally decide to shell out for a bed. Could I have done this ages ago? Yes, absolutely, but also you still lose hunger during the night, so until recently it just made sense to keep working through it and get something out of those calories. After a nice restful evening of being under siege by forces beyond mortal ken, I wake up refreshed and ready to take on the world. With the benefit of daylight, I can then see the thing shooting me is not, in fact, an archer of some sort, but instead a giant sentient cactus skeleton that somehow would benefit more from the dedicated attention of a chiropractic specialist than I would. Spines are supposed to go in your body, buddy. You should really get that looked at. To summarize this long and drawn-out engagement, it shoots me a bit. I hide for a bit. It gets the memo and starts leaving. I run after it with my brand new handy-dandy bundle of cattails on a stick that I call a shield, projecting extreme alpha energy, and it runs into the lake. I miss it with some spears, it shoots me back to nearly 0 health again, and we both agree to go our separate ways. Yeah, whatever. It left, that's all I care about. The one silver lining to all of this pointless combat is that it wastes enough time for my charcoal pit to finish doing its thing, so after Pointy and Persistent wanders off to plains unknown, I can crack that open and start digging out myself a healthy assortment of extremely well-done baked potatoes for future smithing projects. There is quite a lot of charcoal here, actually, so fingers crossed that I won't have to make another one of these for a bit. With charcoal comes progress, so let's make some copper tools. With all that prep done, the actual process is fairly simple. All I need to do is crank a crucible onto a campfire, pour some nuggies into it, and apply hot charcoal. It takes a little bit, so in the meantime I roast up some random leftovers to get them out of my inventory, but if you ignore the incredibly plausible physics that is having a forge temperature fire right next to highly flammable wicker baskets, it works out great. Once my metal is nice and runny, I can then pick up the crucible with some tongs and pour it into a cast. In theory. I did struggle a few times trying to tell my character to use the tongs instead of their fingers, but once we got that minor miscommunication figured out, it was smooth sailing. Metal juice goes into the mold, and then we wait. While I was at it, I also made a copper hammer, because the guide said to. I'm not entirely sure what this does yet, but I'm sure it matters for something. My next port of call, then, is obviously to try and mine out a bunch more copper, but I can't do much of anything while my pickaxe is cooling, and for once I am very well set up for food, so I decide to do something a tad unusual for me this early on into most games and start planning out my new house. This is a little bit tricky, since I don't really know any of the mechanics of this game, and there is a very real chance I will end up wildly undershooting how much space I'll need to live comfortably, but for now my plan is to just clear out a large flat space, save the fertile soil for farming plots in the future, and slowly work on creating an elevated platform with some sort of verticality over the surrounding terrain. This, combined with a few low walls, and if I'm feeling really adventurous, a moat, should hopefully be enough passive defense to keep out the undesirables, while also being simple enough to expand that I'm not locked into one specific design too early. It also is going to take flipping forever, so no worries just yet. Once my copper is cooled, I smush a stick into the pickaxe hole, and just like that, I have advanced to the pinnacle of copper-on-stick technology. Such miraculous developments. Now we just need more copper. I haven't had great luck finding copper veins, but I do have a few marked, so I head off to the closest one with native ore still marking its location, and was going to start digging in it, until I once again got sidetracked by a bunch of fresh soup on the hoof. After playing Ring Around the Topiary for several minutes, Fresh Soup on the Hoof then took objection to me objectifying it, and ramming several spears up its rear end, turned the tables on me, and then kicked me in the face until I had a dirt nap, which is just so inconsiderate. Spears like that don't come cheap, you know. I had to invest effort to get those where I put them. Conveniently, I respawn close by. Inconveniently, I spawn close nearby, right next to a wolf, which I'm then forced to chase off, and by the time that whole adventure is over, it's nearly nighttime. So, yeah, wildlife. Still an issue, in case you were wondering. With the Guardians of the Copper Cache defeated, or at least suitably well fed on my predecessor's remains, I am then free to actually, mine the copper, if I could find it. Now, I did find some, specifically a whole 19 chunks of low-quality ore, but hello? Copper? That's like 3 tools worth. Do I seriously only get 3 tools of copper per ore vein? I literally died for this, You could have at least given me a few clusters of higher grade ore or something. Well, fine then. If that's how it's going to be, I guess I will just have to go find more copper veins and console myself by stealing literally every berry bush I find, because my comments told me to. How do you like that, game?
5 hours later.
See, I told you I could do it. We will ignore the fact that it took the better part of a full day and an entire GI tract full of berries, but I can do it. More copper does exist. All funnies aside, I'm fairly certain that 20-ish copper is just the typical amount of copper that you find in this sort of vein because they all come up with about the same size and relative position underground. Maybe there are richer veins or something, but my one brief foray into caves saw me running in mortal terror from a temporospatially claudicated spider bot on wheels, so we're gonna hold off on exploring those for a bit. Speaking of which, I have mousepads. Those two topics are entirely unrelated, of course, but if you're interested in picking one up, the link is in the description. I can personally attest that they are lovely mousepads if you ignore the inconvenient Goose-themed branding on them. I am told that this is a selling point, but who am I to judge people's preferences? Anyway, one of the nice things about being forced to forage so far outside my normal stomping grounds for ore is that it also forces me to explore the world in general, and I've gotta say, it was well worth the effort. It's difficult to explain exactly what I find so appealing about this game, but if you will allow me to soapbox for a moment, I'm more than happy to try. So, to start with, I don't particularly like newer versions of Minecraft. I don't hate them, I just would prefer to play the older, simpler ones, and for a long time I struggled to put my finger on why, until I watched a cubic meter video focusing on, of all things, storage technology. So to briefly summarize, Cubic was interested in looking at a property of information-containing systems called entropy in the context of storage solutions in Minecraft, which in this case pretty much boils down to how organized or disorganized chests are, and if you could quickly find something you're looking for in them. It's kind of Omega nerd stuff, but you don't need to know how it works for me to get to the point here. Anyway, the big takeaway he reached, through mechanics that I'm not going to go into, is that the average Minecrafter's storage pile has become increasingly more entropic over time as a direct result of new content being added to the game, which makes sense, because more things mean more possible ways to mess up with your chests. More entropy, though, means it's harder to find what you're looking for unless you do work to reduce that entropy, either by sorting or making machines to do it for you. So this is a bad thing, but he was only focused on entropy in the context of sorting systems, and that's largely where he left it. Well, I'm going to take it a step further. More stuff in the game doesn't just increase the entropy, read chaos, of your loot pile, it increases the entropy of the game itself. Every new block Mojang adds to the game reduces the average likelihood that any single block will be relevant. Every new biome added reduces the relative chance of finding a biome that you want to live in. This addition rule applies to everything, and the end result is that even though you can now do and see and mine and build more different things, doing the one specific thing you want to do is, on average, meaninglessly more complicated, proportionally less rewarding, and I would argue, less fun, for no substantial benefit whatsoever. Now, to be fair, this is unavoidable, and it kind of puts Mojang in a bit of a bind design-wise because simple games don't sell. In order to keep the game relevant and interesting for new players and to retain their existing ones, they need new stuff, but the more new stuff they add, the less of an impact it has, and the less it will get used, so they need more new stuff, and the vicious cycle continues. To give you an example, horses, when they came out, were game-changing. Llamas, when they came out, were barely a novelty, and I defy you to name a single reason for sniffers to exist other than as fan service. To continue on this trend with a bit more of a specific example, buttons fill a useful technical niche in certain redstone contexts. It makes sense to have a button in the game. We have 14. Can you name all 14 kinds of button in Minecraft? I sure couldn't until I looked them up. Why do we have 14 types of button? They all do the same thing, mostly. Well, because getting rid of the 12 unnecessary varieties of the exact same thing that we had and adding the miraculous substance known as paint isn't something that you can make shiny new concept art for and sell to Mojang's target audience. Keep in mind that this audience is the same group of people that thought phantoms were a good idea to add to the game, so quality of life and good design are clearly not their priorities here. They are far more motivated by pretty shiny pictures, and less so by the long-term implications of game changes. The end result of this conflicting set of motivations is bloat, and the bloat, I think, is what exhausts me about newer versions of Minecraft. Packs like New Horizons are, weirdly enough, really good about limiting you to a fairly small subset of its gameplay loop at any given time, and go out of their way to reduce this bloat. Essentially, everything above your tech tier is uncraftable, and everything below your tech tier is trivialized or irrelevant. All you have to do, then, is care about your current tier, and while yeah, there is a lot more stuff in that tier than a regular Minecraft world, it's a lot of unique things that benefit from careful consideration, not 30,000 different varieties of the exact same machine. On the other hand, Minecraft literally released a flagship update whose principal, most important change that they plastered across all of the splash screens was adding different looking varieties of mobs. Not different mobs, different looking mobs that did the same thing. You could do this with a texture pack 10 years ago. Additions like this literally do not matter. All they do is demand attention without rewarding it with any sort of tangible benefit. So all this to say, the reason I like Vintage Story is that it has thus far done the complete opposite. There is some variety, which is nice, but it is not an overwhelming amount of variety. It gives you a handful of game mechanics, and thus far they have remained remarkably consistent throughout the run. The world design is aesthetically pleasing without being overbearingly novel and unique every time you turn a corner, and the variety in it is something you have to seek out and earn intentionally through hard work or exploration, rather than having it forced upon you immediately when you enter. It is, in a word, far more relaxing than modern Minecraft is. Anyway, TLDR, back in my days, things were simple. You kids and your newfangled toys herder, blah blah blah, old man energy. By the time I run out of inventory space and get back home, I have amassed a truly substantial amount of all sorts of wonderful things, and my composition is now roughly 40% cranberry by volume thanks to all the bushes that I collected. I know you folks said, hey Goose, you should pick up berry bushes, and I appreciate that recommendation, because I didn't realize you could do that, but I think either y'all have vastly underestimated my response to that comment, or I have vastly overestimated the amount of berries someone consumed before liquefying into a vaguely feathery slop of fruit mash, because I came back with over 2 stacks of assorted shrubbery and have no intention of stopping anytime soon. This is in addition to the 30 or so seeds I found, the multiple fruit trees I now know the locations of, and of course the 2-ish stacks of copper-bearing rock I grabbed. Overall, a very successful mission. Perhaps too successful. I hope the vegetables grow up soon, otherwise my bowels will never be the same again. With this sudden excess of copper, I can then propel myself into the late Copper Age relatively quickly. Or at least I could if I could figure out how to break apart the ore chunks into nuggets. It really should not be this hard. You have the ore, you hit it with a hammer to break it apart. Sure, using a big rock would probably be cheaper and more effective than a very expensive lump of copper on a stick, but we will ignore that. In the meantime, why won't you break? It turns out the hammer is a crafting tool. You don't actually need to hit the ore with it. Now, from a time-saving perspective, this makes perfect sense, and I understand completely, but it's a hammer. Why can't I hit things with it? That is lame. Anyway, once I've cracked my nugs into bite-sized nuggies, my next task is to trank out 180 of them into a crucible and pour that liquid goodness into an anvil mold. I do that, this time without scalding my fingers on the 1300 degrees centigrade jug of spicy metal water, and now we are back to waiting again for the anvil to cool down, so I decide to return to my future home renovation project to pass the time. Is this the most productive use of my summer months? No, not really. Do I care? Also, no, not really. When in doubt, there is always grubbing for cattails, and if that fails, it isn't like dying really does anything, so I will be fine. My excavations are soon after interrupted by a chat message warning me of an approaching temporal storm on the horizon, reminding me that yes, this is a survival game, and no, my stomach is not the only thing that wants to kill me in it. Temporal storms, as far as I'm aware, are basically just the blood moon of Vintage Story. Temporal stability goes down during them, rifts in reality open, and dangerous spoopy monsters pop out looking to non-consensually extract a variety of natural and artificial flavors from the meat suit that I'm currently piloting around. There is precisely nothing I can do about this, other than hide when it arrives, so I opt to do nothing, in favor of digging out a bunch of lead from a nearby ore vein that was in the way of my construction progress. As far as I can tell, lead is largely useless for anything other than as a trace crafting ingredient and decorative purposes, but it seems silly to waste ore when the ore is already so scarce. The resultant lead dust will no doubt be fantastic for my long-term health and mental stability, but that is a problem for future Goose to deal with. Speaking of which, it looks like that temporal storm just hit. Now, I will admit, I wasn't really expecting a whole lot to happen here, other than monsters to appear, but I gotta say, hats off to the devs here, because the visual effect here is way better than I was expecting. Canonically, temporal stability is basically a measure of how well anchored you are to reality, and the whole world twisting into hostile, disturbing shapes around you thing sells that impression really well. Mind you, I get like 20 seconds to enjoy these effects before I'm chased back into my hobbit hole by the hostile presences that made themselves known violently, but still, this is awesome, and I am really looking forward to see what a stronger storm looks like. For those wondering, you also can't sleep through a storm, and if you try, you are greeted with an ominous message that says if you go to sleep now, you would no longer be able to wake up, which is creepy, but fits. The storm goes by pretty quickly, but stepping outside so soon after its passing would still be an invitation for creative body repurposement at the manipulative appendages of the local tentacle horrors, and since this is a family-friendly channel, I will obviously not be doing that, and as such am stuck trying to keep myself entertained while the local land squid convention wanders off to parts unknown. Lacking anything more productive to do, I opt to get myself a forging station set up. Game progression at this point involves doing quite a lot of wandering around and hitting things with pickaxes, so I make another one of those, along with a prospector's pick, which is basically just half a pickaxe, despite costing the same amount of copper, and a couple of ingots for a saw. Wooden planks are used in a lot of things, but I don't plan on needing them too much until I have a proper living space set up. After that is done, I legitimately have nothing worth doing, so I just mess around with some more clay and make more ingot molds. I have not the foggiest idea if they'll be useful, but they seem handy to have around, so why not? Once the big spookums pack their bags, it's back to work throwing shovels down a hole and calling it progress. Now, I'm not going to beat around the bush here, because I need the bushes gone, mostly. This is just me spending half an hour making a flat spot. If I had any poignantly insightful commentary to insert, I would, but I already sent my one interesting thought, providing a boomer's opinion on Minecraft, so we will just skip it in favor of not treating you to a montage of me doing nothing but digging and placing dirt blocks. My floor plan, if you can call it that, is to have a series of 14 by 14 cells bordered by a solid 1 block thick wall of stone that can serve various functions as my technology base develops and diversifies. At the moment, there's really only two things I care about that take up any significant space, which are farming and storage. And farming, for a while at least, is as simple as weighing down some soil on a bit of a raised platform to keep out the animals, though I will end up slapping fences on them anyway, just to be sure. Storage, and by extension all of the other activities that I do with the contents of my storage, is going to need to be cleaned up and separated later, so I just make an empty cell that will pretend is a house for now, and we can deal with that at a later date. Stone collection proves to be a bit of a hassle at the moment, as I would have to hemorrhage copper in order to keep up with the demands of building even a small house, so for now I don't bother, and just work on taking apart some of the local ruins. I was planning on doing this anyway, so I'm not really losing out on much, and in the future a lack of useless rock is going to be the least of my concerns, so I'm fine with living in my hovel a bit longer if it means not wasting pickaxes. All those projects, for now, will have to be put on the back burner though, as once again, I am out of food. Or, more specifically, I'm out of good food. I have plenty of cranberries left over, but they only have a day or so left before they spoil, and I have long since eaten all of my crocked up leftovers, meaning it is once again time to venture out in search of mushrooms and tasty, tasty animals. And also collect every berry bush I find. No, I don't have food insecurity problems. You have food insecurity problems. Just let me engage in my amateur porniculture in peace, why don't you? The nice part about this adventure is that now that I know I need to keep an eye out for it, I can use this chance to look for more copper veins, which I find. The less nice part of it is that either hunting is really difficult or I'm just uniquely terrible at it. I honestly have far more luck hunting wolves, because at least they will come to me rather than the other way around, and the amount of time that I spent racing after even a single chicken with a spear frantically poking in its general direction is kind of absurd. In fact, I'm so unsuccessful at hunting that the only worthwhile piece of prey I was able to bag during the entire day is a particularly large deer with an equally substantial lack of common sense. And this was only because I got a couple of spears into it. It decided it wanted to chase me around in circles while I kept reusing the spears I'd already hit it with, and we played Ring Around the Rosie until it fell over. Still, combined with a rabbit from earlier and a truly substantial amount of mushrooms and berries I grabbed along the way, it will do for now. And for now, I think that is where we will leave it off for today. Thank you for your time. If you would like to engage in a spot of slightly more productive hunting for quality Goose merchandise, mousepad information is in the link below, and I hope you enjoyed.